the case of the self-to-inflicted lawsuit. Welcome back, and if you're new here, I'm the Untold host, and here are 3 stories of some real creepy neighbors. Alright, so picture this. It was the summer of 2007. Not just any summer, but one of those scorchers in a dusty, forgettable little town in southern Ohio. You know the type of place. A few main streets, a couple of diners, and a courthouse that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since Eisenhower was in office. A place where nothing really happened. Ever. Until the case of Arthur Pendelton. Now, Arthur Pendelton wasn't anyone special. He was a quiet, unassuming man in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. Worked as an accountant for a local lumber yard. Lived alone in a small, meticulously kept house on the edge of town, and drove a sensible sedan that probably wasn't much younger than he was. He was the kind of guy you'd pass on the street and forget instantly, utterly unremarkable. Which is precisely why what happened next made absolutely no sense. One sweltering July morning, the county clerk, a perpetually flustered woman named Agnes Periwinkle, found a stack of legal documents slid under her office door. This wasn't unusual, but the title of the case made her stop dead in her tracks. It read, Pendelton v. Pendelton. Agnes, thinking it was a typo, or maybe a strange divorce filing where both parties shared the same last name, looked closer. And that's when her jaw dropped. The plaintiff was listed as Arthur Pendelton, and the defendant, also listed as Arthur Pendelton. Agnes thought it was a joke, someone playing a prank, but the paperwork was all there, neatly filled out, notarized, filed correctly. It was a legitimate lawsuit. Arthur Pendelton was suing Arthur Pendelton. She called Judge Harrison, the only judge in that sleepy county, a man who had seen everything in his 30 years on the bench. He just chuckled when Agnes explained. Agnes, are you sure you're feeling all right? Did you read that right? Judge, Agnes insisted. I'm looking at it right now. Arthur Pendelton versus Arthur Pendelton for gross negligence resulting in severe emotional distress and punitive damages. The judge's chuckle died. Gross negligence, emotional distress, from himself? But the documents were valid, and according to the law, if a legitimate complaint was filed, it had to be heard. So, a summons was issued, and Arthur Pendelton was formally served by being handed the summons to himself. The local newspaper, the Ohio Valley Ledger, usually reserved its front page for stories about unusually large pumpkins or church bake sales. But the headline that week read, Local man sues himself, courtroom circus or legal loophole. Arthur Pendelton, the plaintiff, showed up in court looking exactly like Arthur Pendelton, the defendant. Same sensible suit, same slightly bewildered expression. He sat on one side of the courtroom, then, when instructed, moved to the other. It was surreal. Judge Harrison, trying to maintain some semblance of order in his already bewildered courtroom, addressed Arthur directly. Mr. Pendelton, he said, trying to keep a straight face, can you explain to the court the nature of this lawsuit? You are suing yourself? Arthur cleared his throat. He spoke in a soft, even voice, barely above a whisper. Your Honor, he began, I am suing myself for damages sustained due to gross negligence and a severe ongoing pattern of behavior that has caused me, Arthur Pendelton, immense emotional distress and has fundamentally disrupted my life. The courtroom gallery, which was packed with curious townsfolk, collectively murmured, and what precisely is this negligent behavior you refer to, Mr. Pendelton? The judge asked, leaning forward. Arthur took a deep breath. The defendant, Arthur Pendelton, he stated, looking at his empty seat on the other side of the courtroom, has repeatedly failed to adequately safeguard the mental and emotional well-being of the plaintiff, Arthur Pendelton. Specifically, he has ignored clear warning signs, failed to seek timely professional help for persistent and debilitating anxieties, and has, through inaction, allowed a spiraling deterioration of the plaintiff's quality of life. The crowd shifted. This wasn't a joke. This was bizarre. Arthur then proceeded to detail the damages. He spoke about sleepless nights, about a constant low hum of dread that had followed him for months, about an inability to focus at work, and a general feeling of being overwhelmed and disconnected. He even brought in his medical records, showing prescriptions for anti-anxiety medication and notes from a doctor confirming severe generalized anxiety disorder. He was arguing that he himself had been negligent in not addressing his own mental health issues sooner, and that this neglect had caused him immense suffering. It was a case of self-blame, externalized into a legal battle. The judge listened patiently, trying to wrap his head around it. "Mr. Pendelton," he said, "who is representing the defendant, Arthur Pendelton?" Arthur blinked. "I am, Your Honor. The defendant, Arthur Pendelton, cannot adequately represent himself, as he is the source of the negligence. So I, Arthur Pendelton, am acting as his counsel in spirit to ensure a fair trial." It was a legal knot that tied itself. Arthur Pendleton, the plaintiff, presenting evidence against Arthur Pendleton, the defendant, while simultaneously claiming to be the defendant's counsel in spirit. The trial went on for 2 surreal days. Arthur called himself to the stand. He cross-examined himself. He presented medical documents, a journal he had kept detailing his anxieties, and even a character witness, his elderly aunt, who testified that Arthur had indeed seemed off for quite some time, losing weight and looking perpetually stressed. The town, initially amused, was now captivated. Was this genius or madness? On the 3rd day after Arthur Pendleton, the plaintiff, had rested his case, Judge Harrison retired to his chambers. The entire town waited with bated breath. Hours passed. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the courtroom. Finally, the bailiff announced that the judge was ready. Judge Harrison re-entered the courtroom, his face unreadable. He sat down, adjusted his spectacles, and looked at Arthur Pendleton, who was sitting expectantly in the plaintiff's chair. "Mr. Pendleton," the judge began, his voice slow and deliberate, "this court has thoroughly reviewed the evidence presented. It is clear that the plaintiff, Arthur Pendleton, has indeed suffered significant emotional distress." Arthur nodded, a flicker of something in his eyes. "And it is also clear," the judge continued, "that the defendant, Arthur Pendleton, through a prolonged period of inattention and inaction regarding his own mental well-being, has contributed directly to this distress." The crowd held its breath. "Therefore," Judge Harrison said, his voice rising slightly, "this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Arthur Pendleton, against the defendant, Arthur Pendleton." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. He won. He actually won. "However," the judge added, raising a hand, "this court must also consider the practical implications of such a ruling. To impose a financial penalty on the defendant, Arthur Pendleton, payable to the plaintiff, Arthur Pendleton, would serve no punitive purpose, as it would merely be transferring funds from one pocket to another. It would be a meaningless act, a legal charade." Arthur's face, which had briefly lit up, now fell. Therefore, the judge concluded, "This court awards the plaintiff, Arthur Pendleton, a remedy in the form of mandated self-care. The defendant, Arthur Pendleton, is hereby ordered to immediately engage in regular therapy sessions, a prescribed exercise regimen, and a daily practice of mindfulness, all to be overseen and reported upon by a certified medical professional for a period of no less than 1 year. Failure to comply will result in a finding of contempt of court." And with a bang of his gavel, Judge Harrison closed the bizarre case of Pendleton v. Pendleton. Arthur Pendleton had sued himself, and he had won. But his victory wasn't financial. It was an order to actively, legally take care of himself. The town was abuzz. Some called it ingenious. Others, a waste of taxpayer money. Arthur himself seemed relieved. He actually started therapy, got a gym membership, and even started taking walks in the park, meticulously logging his progress for his mandated reports. But the story doesn't end there, because what happened next is where it gets truly unsettling. About 6 months after the verdict, Arthur Pendleton was, by all accounts, doing much better. He looked healthier, less stressed. He even smiled occasionally. He was complying with his court order. Then one morning, Agnes Periwinkle received another strange filing. This time, it was an appeal from Arthur Pendelton. Arthur Pendelton, the defendant, was appealing the verdict. The new filing argued that the mandated self-care was an undue burden, an infringement on his personal liberty, and that the original lawsuit had been filed under duress. It was signed by Arthur Pendelton, defendant. The whole town was bewildered again. Was he just playing a new game? Was this some elaborate performance art? Judge Harrison, looking even more exasperated than usual, agreed to hear the appeal. And once again, Arthur Pendleton showed up in court, sitting first as the appellant, then moving to the respondent's chair. But something was different this time. When Arthur Pendleton, the appellant, spoke, his voice was sharper, more agitated. He argued fiercely, almost angrily, that he shouldn't be forced to engage in therapy or exercise. He claimed his previous self, the plaintiff, had been overly sensitive, weak, and had made a mountain out of a molehill. And when he spoke as Arthur Pendleton, the respondent, the original plaintiff, his voice was quieter, more desperate. He tried to defend the original ruling, pleading with the judge to see the necessity of the self-care. It was like two distinct personalities were arguing through the same mouth. The town watched, horrified and fascinated. This wasn't just a legal curiosity anymore. It felt like a man was genuinely fracturing before their eyes. Judge Harrison, seeing the deep distress on Arthur's face, the trembling hands, the rapid shifts in tone and demeanor, made a difficult decision. He suspended the appeal and ordered Arthur Pendleton to undergo an immediate, comprehensive psychological evaluation. The results came back a week later, and they were grim. Arthur Pendleton was diagnosed with a severe dissociative identity disorder, or DID. What the town had seen as a bizarre lawsuit was, in fact, the desperate cry for help from one of Arthur's personalities, the plaintiff who was suffering due to the neglect of another dominant personality. The defendant, the shifting voices, the conflicting arguments, they weren't theatrics. They were real. The initial personality, the plaintiff Arthur, had been trying to legally force the defendant Arthur, the one who was neglecting his mental health, to get help. And when that dominant personality felt constrained by the court order, it had lashed out, filing an appeal to free itself from the mandated self-care. It was a legal case born from a broken mind, a man literally suing the part of himself that was causing him harm, and winning only for another part of himself to fight back. Arthur Pendleton was placed under the care of a team of psychiatrists. He spent the next year in intensive therapy working to integrate his fractured self. The town never forgot the summer of Pendelton v. Pendelton. And the chilling reality of it all, the lawsuit, the public spectacle, the legal mandate, it was the only way one part of Arthur Pendleton could force the other parts to acknowledge the suffering and to seek the help he desperately needed. It was a victory, not of law, but of a mind fighting for its own survival. A truly strange, dark, and mysterious tale, proving that sometimes the greatest battles aren't against external forces, but against the hidden complexities within ourselves. And sometimes you have to sue yourself to save yourself.
Side-eye in your closet? Do me a favor. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you'll never miss a tale untold every day.